The auctioneer's hammer fell 3 times on the Bennett family homestead, each strike echoing across 200 years of bloodline and broken promises. Thomas Bennett stood at the back of the county courthouse, work-scarred hands gripping a foreclosure notice that had arrived the same week his uncle's lawyer called about an inheritance. The irony tasted like rust and rain, losing everything his ancestors had built while inheriting something from the one family member who'd walked away from farming and never looked back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tom was 42 years old, and the lines carved into his face told the story of a man who'd fought the land and the banks in his own stubborn pride for 20 years. His wife Sarah had been gone 4 years now, cancer taking her slowly while the medical bills piled up faster than the autumn harvest. Their daughter Rebecca was finishing nursing school 2 states away, working double shifts to pay tuition because Tom couldn't help her anymore. The farm that had fed 5 generations of Bennett's was now owned by Cornerstone Agricultural Holdings, a faceless corporation that had bought his debt from the local bank and foreclosed before he could blink. The November wind cut through his canvas jacket as he walked to his truck, an '03 Ford that burned oil and needed a new transmission. Everything he owned now fit in the bed of that truck in a storage unit he could barely afford. The homestead would be cleared out by week's end. The fields his great-great-grandfather had cleared with mules and determination would grow soybeans for some corporate quarterly report. His grandfather's workshop, where 3 generations had learned to fix everything from tractors to broken hearts, would probably be demolished for equipment storage. Tom drove through Mercer County in the fading light, past farms that used to have names and faces, now just numbered parcels on corporate spreadsheets. The landscape looked the same, rolling hills, tree lines marking old property boundaries, silos rising against the darkening sky, but the soul had been gutted from it. The Henderson's place was now parcel 247B. The Callaway farm where he'd learned to drive a combine was operational unit 12. Progress, they called it. Efficiency. Tom called it something else entirely. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dad, did it happen? Call me when you can." He couldn't call her yet. Couldn't hear the worry in her voice or the guilt that she wasn't there to help. She had her own future to build, and he wouldn't let his failures become her anchor. The Bennett legacy of land and legacy was ending with him, and that weight was his alone to carry. The address Uncle Raymond's lawyer had given him was in Whitfield, a dying river town 40 miles south where the old tobacco warehouses stood empty along the waterfront like forgotten cathedrals. Tom had only met his uncle 3 times in his life. Raymond Bennett had left the family farm at 18, right after Tom's grandfather called him a coward for refusing to take over the land. Raymond had gone to the city, made money in ways the family never quite understood or approved of, and never came back except for funerals where he'd stand at the edges, watching but never belonging. The call from Raymond's estate lawyer had come as a shock. Uncle Raymond had died 6 months ago, and for reasons the lawyer couldn't explain, he'd left Tom a warehouse property in Whitfield. Not money, which Tom desperately needed. Not land he could farm. A warehouse in a town that had been dying since the tobacco market collapsed in the 90s. Whitfield appeared through the truck's dirty windshield like a ghost of better times. Main Street was half boarded up, empty storefronts with faded signs advertising services nobody needed anymore. The old movie theater was now a thrift store. The diner where river workers used to eat was a payday loan place. Tom followed the GPS to the waterfront district where the warehouses stood in rows, most of them collapsing into themselves, windows broken, roofs sagging under decades of neglect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Number 1847, Riverside Drive sat at the end of the row, a 3-story brick structure that looked somehow more solid than its neighbors. The windows were intact, covered from inside with what looked like old newspaper or boards. Heavy chains and 3 different padlocks secured the main entrance. A rusted sign above the door read Bennett & Sons Storage EST 1891, a name Tom had never heard mentioned in family stories. The lawyer, a tired-looking man named Peterson, was waiting in a BMW that seemed obscene parked in front of the decaying building. He stepped out carrying a briefcase and an expression that suggested he wanted this meeting over quickly. "Mr. Bennett," Peterson said, shaking Tom's hand with minimal enthusiasm. "I'm glad you could make it. Shall we get this done? I have the keys and the property deed ready for transfer." "What exactly did my uncle use this place for?" Tom asked, studying the building's facade. The brickwork was quality, the kind of craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore. Peterson shrugged. "Storage, apparently. Your uncle purchased it 30 years ago and paid the property taxes every year, but as far as I can determine, he rarely visited. There's no business license on file, no insurance claims, nothing. The building's been locked up since at least 2010 according to city records." "So you don't know what's inside?" "Haven't been in myself. Your uncle's instructions were very specific. The property goes to you, sealed and untouched." He left a letter. Peterson pulled an envelope from his briefcase, yellowed with age. He wrote this 20 years ago, when he first drafted his will. Updated the will several times after that, but never changed this letter. Tom took the envelope. His name was written across the front in shaky handwriting. "Thomas Bennett, open when you're ready to understand." "Cryptic old bastard," Peterson muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry. But your uncle was an unusual man. Very private. Very particular." The lawyer handed over a ring of keys, old skeleton keys, modern deadbolts, and one that looked like it belonged to a safe. "The property is yours, free and clear. Taxes are current through the end of the year. After that, you're responsible. Fair warning though, the building needs work, and this part of Whitfield isn't exactly booming. If you want to sell, I can recommend a commercial real estate agent who handles distressed properties." Tom looked at the building again, then at the foreclosure notice still crumpled in his jacket pocket. "How much is it worth?" "As is? Maybe $50,000 if you find the right buyer. Most likely scenario, someone buys it for 30 and tears it down for the lot." Peterson closed his briefcase. "Look, I know your situation. Your uncle apparently kept up with family news even if he didn't participate. That's probably why he left this to you specifically." "My situation?" "The foreclosure. It was in the county legal notices last month." Peterson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Your uncle changed his will one final time about 8 months ago, right before his heart attack. Made sure this property would come to you and no one else. I think he was trying to help." After Peterson left, Tom stood alone on the empty street as darkness fell. The November wind off the river carried the smell of water and decay. He could sell this building, pocket whatever money came from it, and maybe find an apartment somewhere. Start over doing what, he didn't know. 42 years old with a failed farm and no skills that translated to anything else. He'd spent his whole life understanding soil and seasons, weather patterns and crop rotations. What did any of that matter now? He opened his uncle's letter, the paper brittle under his fingers. "Thomas, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you probably think I'm a fool for leaving you a building instead of money. You're not entirely wrong. But money disappears. Buildings, and what they hold, are different. I left the family because your grandfather couldn't see past the dirt under his fingernails. He thought the land was everything, that staying meant honor and leaving meant cowardice. He was wrong. Sometimes staying is the coward's choice, and leaving takes more courage than planting one more season of the same crop. I built something different with my life. Made mistakes, made money, made enemies. This warehouse holds what I couldn't tell anyone while I was alive. Call it insurance, call it conscience, call it whatever you want. It's yours now. There are things in that building worth more than money, Thomas. Things that could change your life or destroy it, depending on how you use them. I'm trusting you to be smarter than I was, braver than your grandfather, and more careful than your father. The main storage room is on the 3rd floor, northwest corner. That's where you start. What you do after that is up to you. But remember, some secrets stay buried for good reasons, and digging them up has consequences. You're a Bennett. That means something, even if none of us could ever agree on what. Good luck. Raymond Tom read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. The wind rattled loose boards on a neighboring warehouse, a sound like bones shifting in a grave. His uncle had always been the family mystery, the brother who'd broken away and never explained why. And now, from beyond death, he was offering some kind of inheritance that came with warnings instead of comfort. Tom approached the warehouse door, sorting through the keys. The first two locks opened easily, decades of disuse making them stiff but functional. The third lock, the newest one, resisted until he put his weight into it. The door opened inward with a groan of old hinges, releasing air that smelled of dust and time and something else he couldn't quite identify. Motor oil maybe, or leather. He clicked on his phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through darkness that felt solid, revealing a vast open space on the ground floor. Old loading equipment stood against the walls, hand trucks, rope pulleys, wooden pallets stacked and forgotten. The floor was concrete, surprisingly clean given the building's age. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper inside, finding a metal staircase leading upward. The second floor was similar, empty storage space with a few wooden crates stacked near the windows. But it was the third floor, where his uncle's letter had directed him, that made Tom stop at the top of the stairs and stare. The entire northwest corner had been converted into something that looked like a workshop or study. A heavy wooden desk sat beneath boarded windows. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. And against the far wall, built into the brick itself, was a vault door, the old-fashioned kind from turn-of-the-century banks, with a massive will lock and reinforced steel plating. Tom approached the desk first. Dust covered everything, but beneath it he could see his uncle had been organized. Ledgers were stacked neatly. A desk lamp that probably hadn't worked in years. And in the center, weighted down by a rock from the river, a single piece of paper with fresh ink, written recently, in the shaky hand Tom recognized from the letter. Thomas, the combination to the vault is written on the back of your grandmother's photograph. The photograph is in the bottom right desk drawer. What you do with what's inside is your choice. But understand this, some people have been looking for what's in that vault for over 150 years. Once you open it, that search will find you. Choose wisely. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he opened the desk drawer. Inside, beneath a layer of old newspapers from the 1970s, he found a framed photograph. His grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, standing in front of the old farmhouse in what looked like the 1940s. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her, not yet marked by the years of hard work and grief that would eventually define her. He turned the frame over. Taped to the back was a piece of paper with numbers written in his uncle's handwriting, 17-38-42-9. Tom stood in the dusty silence of the warehouse, his uncle's warnings echoing in his head. The smart thing would be to walk away. Sell the building as is, take whatever money came from it, and start over somewhere new. The vault and its contents could stay locked forever, somebody else's problem. But he was a Bennett, for better or worse. And Bennetts didn't walk away from mysteries or responsibilities, even when those things came with warnings attached. He'd already lost everything else. What was one more risk in a life that had stopped playing it safe the day Sarah got her diagnosis and he'd mortgaged the farm to pay for treatments that only bought her 6 more months? Tom approached the vault, the combination paper in his hand feeling heavier than it should. The wheel turned smoothly despite its age, each number clicking into place with satisfying precision. When the final number aligned, he heard something inside the vault shift, bolts retracting, mechanisms engaging that hadn't moved in decades. He gripped the wheel and pulled. The vault door swung open with surprising ease, releasing air that had been sealed inside for longer than Tom had been alive. His phone's light couldn't penetrate the darkness fully, so he propped it on a filing cabinet, angling the beam toward the vault's interior. What he saw made him step back, his mind struggling to process the impossible. The vault wasn't large, maybe 8 feet deep and 6 feet wide, but every inch of wall space was covered with shelves, and those shelves were filled with wooden boxes. Not the kind of boxes you bought at a hardware store, but handcrafted pieces with dovetail joints and brass fixtures that spoke of another era entirely. Each box was marked with a date and a number, the writing faded but still legible. Tom pulled out the nearest box, dated 1863, and set it on his uncle's desk. His hands shook as he opened the lid, expecting documents or photographs or maybe more letters explaining what all this meant. Instead, he found gold. Not jewelry or coins scattered loose, but carefully arranged gold bars, each one stamped with a symbol Tom didn't recognize, an eagle over crossed sabers, and beneath that, numbers that might have been weights or serial codes. The bars were small, maybe 5 inches long and an inch thick, but even in the dim light they gleamed with unmistakable authenticity. He opened another box. More gold, differently marked this time, coins from the 1860s, silver dollars mixed with $20 gold pieces, all carefully wrapped in cloth that disintegrated at his touch. A third box contained documents sealed in oilcloth. Tom unwrapped them carefully, revealing hand-drawn maps, military correspondence, and what looked like payroll ledgers from the Confederate Army. One letter, signed by someone named Colonel Marcus Whitfield, detailed the movement of secured assets from Richmond in April 1865, just before the fall of the Confederacy. Tom sat down hard in his uncle's chair, dust rising around him like ghosts. His uncle hadn't left him a warehouse. He'd left him a vault full of Civil War treasure that by all rights shouldn't exist anymore, that had been lost to history for over 150 years, hidden in a dying river town in a building that bore his family's name. And according to his uncle's warnings, someone had been looking for this for all that time. Tom pulled out his phone to call Rebecca, then stopped. What would he even say? That he'd just inherited a fortune that came with a target on his back? That their family's broke farmer legacy was somehow connected to Confederate gold and secrets buried deeper than any crop he'd ever planted? Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the darkness of the old warehouse, Tom heard a sound that might have been settling boards or might have been footsteps. His uncle's words echoed in his head, "Once you open it, that search will find you." The vault door stood open behind him, its contents illuminated by the cold light of his phone. A fortune in gold, a mystery spanning generations, and a warning that came too late to matter. Thomas Bennett had lost his farm, his legacy, and everything his family had built. But sitting in that dusty warehouse, surrounded by secrets and gold and the ghosts of decisions made before he was born, he realized his uncle had given him something more dangerous than inheritance. He'd given him a choice that would define everything that came next. Tom spent the first hour photographing everything, the gold bars, the coins, the documents, the maps. His farmer's practicality demanded documentation before decisions, evidence before action. He worked methodically, cataloging each box by date and contents, his hands steady even as his mind raced with implications he couldn't fully process. The documents told a story that history books had missed. In April 1865, as the Confederate government evacuated Richmond, Colonel Marcus Whitfield had been tasked with moving a payroll shipment meant for troops in the Western Territories. But the war ended before the gold reached its destination, and Whitfield had apparently hidden it rather than surrender it to Union forces. The maps showed a route through Virginia into Tennessee, then westward through Kentucky, ending with a final notation, secured at Riverside Storage, Whitfield Township, M.W., 1867. Marcus Whitfield. The town was named after him. Tom had driven past a historical marker on the way in, something about a Civil War officer who'd founded the settlement after the war. He'd never connected that Whitfield to his own family, never thought to ask why his uncle owned property in a town that shared a colonel's name. But the real mystery was how Raymond Bennett had found it. The documents in the vault included recent additions, photographs from the 1990s showing the same maps and ledgers Tom now held, along with handwritten notes in his uncle's careful script detailing his research. Raymond had spent decades tracking down this treasure, following leads through historical societies and family records, connecting threads that everyone else had missed or given up on. One note, dated 1994, made Tom's blood run cold, confirming Marcus Whitfield married Elizabeth Bennett in 1868. Our great-great-grandmother. The gold has been family property all along, hidden by a man who changed his name and buried his past. But the Whitfield descendants know something. They've been searching county records, asking questions at the historical society. Need to secure everything before they piece it together. Tom sat back, the implications settling over him like cold water. His family wasn't just connected to this treasure by his uncle's discovery, they were connected by blood to the man who'd stolen it and hidden it. Marcus Whitfield had become Marcus Bennett, married into a farming family, and started a new life with Confederate gold as his insurance policy. A secret passed down through whispers and deathbed confessions until his uncle had finally found the truth. The sound of footsteps on the ground floor froze Tom's thoughts. He killed his phone's light instantly, plunging the third floor into darkness. His heart hammered as he moved silently toward the stairwell, pressing himself against the wall where shadows offered the only cover. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried. Someone who knew their way around or didn't care about being heard. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness below, sweeping across the empty first floor. Then a voice, male and unfamiliar, called up the stairs. "Mr. Bennett? Thomas Bennett? I know you're here. Your truck's outside." Tom stayed silent, weighing his options. The vault stood open behind him, full of evidence and treasure that would be impossible to explain or defend. His phone was on the desk, useless as a weapon but necessary if he needed to call for help. "My name is Marcus Whitfield," the voice continued, and Tom felt his stomach drop. "I'm guessing that name means something to you now if you've opened the vault. We need to talk before this situation gets more complicated than it already is." The flashlight beam climbed the stairs, footsteps following. Tom had seconds to decide, hide and hope the man left, or confront whatever this was head-on. His grandfather's voice echoed in memory, "A Bennett doesn't run from trouble. We face it, because the land taught us that problems don't solve themselves." Tom stepped into view at the top of the stairs, his own phone light clicking on to illuminate the man approaching. Marcus Whitfield was perhaps 60, silver-haired and fit, wearing expensive outdoor gear that marked him as someone with money and taste. His expression carried no hostility, just a wary calculation that suggested he'd prepared for this moment carefully. "You're trespassing," Tom said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm aware." Marcus stopped 3 steps from the top, keeping distance between them. "And you're in possession of property that's been claimed by my family for 6 generations. So I'd say we're both in complicated positions. This warehouse belongs to me. My uncle left it to me legally." "The warehouse, yes. What's inside it?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's a different question entirely. Your uncle Raymond and I had an understanding. He kept the gold secure, and I kept the lawyers and treasure hunters away from both of you. But he's dead now, and you weren't part of our agreement." Tom descended a few steps, closing the distance enough to read the other man's face. "If you had an agreement, why didn't he leave any of this to you?" "Because Raymond was a stubborn old bastard who thought blood mattered more than sense." Bitterness edged Marcus's tone. "He spent 40 years finding that treasure, confirming what my family always knew, that our ancestor hid Confederate gold somewhere in this town. When he finally located it, I thought we'd be partners. Instead, he locked me out, said the gold belonged to the Bennett line since Marcus Whitfield became Marcus Bennett when he married into your family. So you've been waiting for him to die. I've been waiting for someone reasonable to inherit." Marcus climbed another step. "That gold is worth millions, Mr. Bennett. Current market value, conservatively? $8 to $10 million. Maybe more if the historical provenance adds value. That's life-changing money for a man who just lost his farm." The knowledge that this stranger knew about Tom's foreclosure shouldn't have been surprising, but it still felt like a violation. "You've been keeping tabs on me." "I've been keeping tabs on Raymond, which meant knowing who stood to inherit. When you lost your property last week, I saw an opportunity for both of us." Marcus reached the top of the stairs, his posture careful and non-threatening. "We could spend years in court fighting over ownership. Confederate gold is legally complicated, arguments about war spoils, abandoned property, family inheritance rights. Or we could split it 50-50, right now, and both walk away with enough money to build new lives." Tom studied the man's face, looking for the lie, the angle he wasn't seeing. And if I say no? Then I file a legal claim tomorrow morning, and the court freezes everything until ownership is determined. Could take 5 years, maybe 10. Meanwhile, the story goes public: bankrupt farmer finds Civil War treasure. Every news outlet, treasure hunter, and opportunist in the country descends on Whitfield. Your life becomes a circus, and you won't see a penny until the lawyers are done bleeding the estate dry. The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, like a weather forecast. Tom recognized the strategy: make the problem seem inevitable, the solution reasonable. He'd seen the same approach from the bank, from Cornerstone Holdings, from everyone who'd wanted something from him when he had nothing left to give. "How did you know I'd open the vault tonight?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I've had a camera on this building for 3 years, Mr. Bennett. I knew the moment you arrived, and I knew what you were looking for the second you found that desk drawer. I gave you time to see what's inside, to understand what's at stake. Now I'm offering you a clean way out of a situation that could destroy you." Tom thought of Rebecca, working double shifts to pay for school. Thought of the foreclosure, the years of debt, the medical bills that had started the spiral. Thought of his grandfather's land, now owned by a corporation that would strip mine it for profits. $8 million could change all of that. Could give his daughter a future without debt. Could buy back the farm, maybe, or at least buy land somewhere else and start over. But his uncle's warning echoed louder: some secrets stay buried for good reasons, and digging them up has consequences. "I need time to think," Tom said finally. "You have until sunrise." Marcus pulled a business card from his jacket. "My number. Call me with your answer, or I call my lawyers. Nothing personal, Mr. Bennett, but I've waited too long to let sentiment get in the way now." After Marcus left, Tom stood alone in the darkness, his uncle's vault open behind him like a wound in time. He could hear the river beyond the warehouse walls, the eternal sound of water moving towards somewhere else, always leaving, never arriving. His phone buzzed. Rebecca, calling for the 3rd time that evening. He couldn't avoid her anymore. "Dad," finally. Her voice carried relief and worry in equal measure. "I've been freaking out. Did the auction happen? Are you okay?" "The farm's gone, Becca." The words felt like stones in his throat. "Cornerstone bought it, and I'm officially homeless as of next week." Silence on the line, heavy with everything unsaid. "Then, come stay with me. I'll make room. We'll figure something out. You live in a studio apartment and work 16-hour shifts. You don't have room for your own life, let alone mine. Then we'll find a bigger place. Dad, you're not alone in this." Tom looked at the gold gleaming in the vault, the fortune that could solve everything or complicate it beyond repair. "I inherited something from Uncle Raymond. A warehouse in Whitfield." "A warehouse? That's what he left you?" Disbelief and frustration colored her tone. "Not money, not land you could use, but a warehouse in a dead town? There's more to it than that." Tom chose his words carefully. "But it's complicated, and I need to figure some things out before I can explain." "Dad, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" "I'm fine, Becca. Just tired. I'll call you tomorrow when I know more." He ended the call before she could press harder, before he had to lie more directly to his daughter. Tom spent the night in the warehouse, unwilling to leave the vault unguarded even with Marcus Whitfield's camera watching. He pulled documents from the boxes, reading by phone light, trying to understand not just what his uncle had found but why he'd kept it secret for so long. One journal, dated 1995, explained Raymond's thinking: every Bennett for 5 generations has broken themselves on that land, pouring blood and money into soil that barely sustains us. My father died at 62, worn out from work that never paid enough. My brother's heading the same direction, too proud to see he's fighting a losing battle. This gold could free the family, but I know what they'd do with it. They'd pour it back into the farm, buy more land, more equipment, more debt dressed up as investment. The land is a hungry god, and my family keeps feeding it their lives. I'm keeping this gold locked away until I find a Bennett smart enough to walk away from that altar." The bitterness in those words stung, partly because Tom heard truth in them. His grandfather had died at 64, his father at 67, both men worn down by work that never got easier and debts that never quite cleared. Tom himself was 42 and felt 70, his body marked by injuries and exhaustion that farming extracted like taxes on existence. But his uncle was wrong about one thing: the land wasn't a God-demanding sacrifice. It was family, legacy, the closest thing to immortality a person could touch. Every Bennett who'd worked that soil had left something of themselves in it, and walking away felt like abandoning everyone who'd come before. Except the land was already gone. Cornerstone Holdings owned it now, and no amount of sentiment would change that. Tom pulled out his phone and dialed the number on Marcus Whitfield's card. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Mr. Bennett. I hoped I'd hear from you before morning." "I want to meet your family," Tom said. "If we're going to split this fortune, I need to know who I'm dealing with. Your history, your claim, everything. Tomorrow, in person. Then I'll give you my answer." A pause, then agreement. "The Whitfield estate, 11 o'clock. I'll text you the address." Marcus hesitated. "For what it's worth, Mr. Bennett, I think you're making the smart choice. Your uncle was brilliant but paranoid. He saw enemies where there were just family trying to reclaim what was taken from us." Tom ended the call without responding. He didn't trust Marcus Whitfield, but he couldn't ignore the practical reality either. Millions of dollars versus years of legal battles and media circuses. It shouldn't be a difficult choice for a man with nothing. But his uncle's warnings kept circling back, and the gold in the vault felt less like salvation and more like bait in a trap he couldn't quite see yet. Dawn found Tom driving back through Mercer County toward the farm, his former farm, unable to stay away despite knowing it would hurt. The November sunrise turned the frost-covered fields golden, beautiful in the way that only temporary things can be. He parked at the gate, the new lock already installed by Cornerstone, and walked along the fence line that had marked his property for 200 years. The soil was dark and rich here, the kind that held moisture and nutrients, that forgave mistakes and rewarded patience. His grandfather used to say you could read a farm's history in its soil, see the droughts in the lighter layers, the good years in the darker depths, the love and neglect written in chemistry and structure that science could measure but never fully explain. Tom knelt and grabbed a handful of earth, letting it run through his fingers. This soil had fed his family for generations, and they'd fed it in return, with sweat, with money, with years of their lives poured into cycles of planting and harvest that stretched back before the Civil War, before the gold, before any of this complicated history had tangled itself around the Bennett name. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a single line: "People are asking questions about Raymond's warehouse. Be careful." Peterson, the lawyer's warning, should have alarmed him, but Tom felt something else, a clarity that came from standing on land he'd lost, holding soil he no longer owned, facing a choice that would define everything that came after. He pulled out his phone and called Rebecca, ready this time to tell her everything. "Dad? What time is it?" Sleep roughened her voice. "I need you to listen to me, Becca, and not interrupt until I'm done." Tom watched the sunrise paint the fields in shades of gold that matched what waited in the vault. "Your Uncle Raymond left me something that's going to change our lives, one way or another. But before I make any decisions, I need you to understand what it means and what it could cost." He told her about the warehouse, the vault, the gold. About Marcus Whitfield and his family's claim. About their ancestor who'd hidden Confederate treasure and built a new life on secrets and stolen money. About the choice he now faced between fortune and the legal battles that would come with it. Rebecca listened in silence until he finished. "Then, how much gold are we talking about?" "Millions. Maybe 10 million, maybe more." "Jesus, Dad." A long pause. "And this Whitfield guy wants to split it with you?" 50-50, if I agree today. Otherwise, he sues, and everything gets frozen while courts fight over it. So take the deal." Rebecca's voice was firm. "We need this, Dad. I'm 24 years old and $40,000 in debt. You just lost everything Grandpa built. This money could fix it all. Your mother would have told me to walk away. Tom surprised himself by saying it. Mom's not here. The bluntness hurt, but Rebecca's voice softened. She'd want you to survive, Dad. To have a life that isn't just struggle and loss. This is your chance. Tom closed his eyes, thinking of Sarah's last clear day before the morphine took her somewhere beyond reaching. She'd made him promise to take care of Rebecca, to make sure their daughter had opportunities they'd never had. She hadn't made him promise to hold on to land that was already slipping away. I'm meeting with Whitfield's family today at 11. After that, I'll decide. Dad, don't overcomplicate this. Take the money. Start over. Let someone else fight about Civil War treasure and family honor. You've paid enough for the Bennett name already. After hanging up, Tom sat in his truck until the sun cleared the horizon, burning off the frost and warming the cab. Rebecca was right, the smart choice was obvious. Take the deal, split the money, walk away from complications that could consume years of his life with no guarantee of a better outcome. But something his grandfather used to say kept nagging at him: easy money comes with hard consequences. The only wealth that lasts is what you build with your own hands on your own terms. Tom started the truck and headed toward Whitfield, toward the estate Marcus had invited him to, toward a family meeting that would reveal more than he wanted to know about the people he was considering as partners. The Whitfield estate sat on 200 acres of prime land overlooking the river, the kind of property that spoke of old money and careful cultivation. The main house was antebellum revival, white columns and black shutters, surrounded by manicured gardens that probably required a full-time staff. Tom's truck looked ridiculous parked among the luxury cars in the circular drive. Marcus met him at the door, dressed casually now in slacks and a sweater that probably cost more than Tom's monthly mortgage used to be. Mr. Bennett, punctual. I appreciate that. Come in. My family is eager to meet you. The interior matched the exterior: expensive furniture, original artwork, Persian rugs that probably cost more than farm equipment. But what caught Tom's attention was the library they entered, where 6 people waited with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Marcus made introductions. His wife, Caroline, polished and cold. His brother David and David's wife Jennifer. 2 younger relatives, cousins or something, whose names Tom immediately forgot. And 1 older woman, maybe 80, sitting in a wingback chair with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. This is my grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, Marcus said with notable deference. She's the family historian and the one who originally tracked down the connection between our ancestor and your family's property. Eleanor studied Tom with eyes that missed nothing. You look like a Bennett. Same stubborn jaw, same working man's hands. Raymond had the same look when I first met him, 40 years ago. You knew my uncle? I employed him, briefly, to help with historical research about our family. That's how he learned about the gold. Eleanor's voice was sharp despite her age. He betrayed that trust and spent decades hiding what should have come to us. The hostility in the room crystallized around Eleanor's words. Tom realized this wasn't a business negotiation, it was a family reclaiming something they believed was stolen from them. The gold was left to me legally, Tom said carefully. My uncle's will was clear. Your uncle was a thief. David Whitfield spoke up, his voice hard. He used information he gained working for our family to locate property that belongs to us by blood right. By blood right? Tom couldn't keep the edge from his tone. You mean by connection to a Confederate officer who stole a military payroll? Who secured assets that would have been confiscated by Northern carpetbaggers, Eleanor corrected sharply. Marcus Whitfield saved that gold from theft and hid it to protect his family's future. That it ended up hidden for generations doesn't change its rightful ownership. Tom looked around the expensive room, at the family united in their conviction that they deserved millions in stolen Confederate gold. Why didn't your ancestor just use the gold himself? He had it, he hid it, he lived another 30 years after the war. Why leave it locked away? Because he was being watched. Eleanor leaned forward, her interest sharpening. Union authorities suspected he'd diverted the gold, but they couldn't prove it. If he'd suddenly shown wealth, they would have arrested him. So he hid it, married into a respectable farming family, and left instructions for his children to retrieve it after his death. But those instructions were lost in a house fire in 1904, and the location died with him. Until my uncle found it. Until your uncle betrayed us and kept it for himself. Marcus's voice was tight. We're offering you a generous split, Mr. Bennett, because we recognize the legal complications. But make no mistake, that gold is Whitfield property, and we'll fight for it with every resource we have. Tom stood, suddenly certain of what he needed to do. I'll give you my answer by tonight. We need an answer now, David insisted. Then my answer is no. Tom headed for the door. I need time to understand what I'm dealing with, and your family just showed me exactly who you are. You're making a mistake, Marcus called after him. We can make your life very difficult, Mr. Bennett. Tom turned at the doorway. You're threatening a man who just lost everything. What exactly do you think you can take from me that hasn't already been taken? He left the Whitfield estate with their anger following him like heat from a fire. The smart choice, the practical choice, was receding in his mind, replaced by something his grandfather would have recognized, pure Bennett stubbornness in the face of people who thought money and status gave them rights they hadn't earned. His phone rang. Peterson, the lawyer. Mr. Bennett, we need to talk immediately. The Whitfield family has filed a preliminary claim against your uncle's estate. They're moving faster than I expected. Let them. Tom's voice was steady now, decided. I'm not splitting that gold with people who think they deserve it because their ancestor was a better thief than most. That's admirably principled, but you need to understand what you're facing. The Whitfield family has resources and connections. This will be expensive and prolonged. Then I guess I'll need to find resources of my own. Tom ended the call and drove back toward the warehouse, toward the vault full of gold and secrets, toward a future he couldn't predict but wouldn't compromise on. The choice wasn't about money anymore. It was about refusing to let people like the Whitfields take one more thing from people like him, people who'd lost enough already. Tom returned to the warehouse as afternoon shadows stretched across Riverside Drive, the building seeming more fortress than storage facility now. He'd spent the drive back making calls, to Rebecca, to Peterson, to a security company that could install proper locks and surveillance before nightfall. The Whitfields had shown their hand, and he'd be damned if he'd make it easy for them to force his. Inside the vault, Tom began the methodical work of cataloging everything his uncle had left behind. Not just the gold, but the documents, the maps, the research that had consumed Raymond's life for 40 years. Each box revealed layers of obsession, newspaper clippings about Whitfield family business dealings, property records going back to 1867, even photographs of Eleanor Whitfield from the 1980s, watching and being watched in return. One journal entry from 2003 stopped Tom cold. Eleanor came to the warehouse today. She knows I found it, can see it in my eyes every time we speak. She offered me $2 million to walk away, let her family claim the discovery. I told her the gold belongs to the Bennetts now, has for 150 years since Marcus Whitfield chose to become Marcus Bennett. She threatened legal action, but she's afraid of what a public search would reveal, that her ancestor was a deserter and a thief who abandoned his post to save himself and the payroll. The Whitfield family's carefully cultivated honor would collapse under that truth. So we're at stalemate. She can't take the gold without destroying her family's reputation, and I won't give it to people who think birthright trumps blood and sweat. Tom sat back, understanding finally clicking into place. His uncle hadn't kept the gold out of greed or paranoia. He'd kept it as leverage, as protection against a family with resources and ruthlessness that could have crushed him if they'd had legal standing. Raymond had spent decades in a cold war with the Whitfields, each side holding pieces the other needed, neither able to make a decisive move. Until now. Until Tom, with nothing left to lose and no stake in the old battles that had defined his uncle's life. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dad, the Whitfield family's lawyers called me. How did they get my number? They said you're making a mistake that will cost both of us everything. What's going on?" Tom called her immediately. Don't talk to them, don't respond to anything they send. They're trying to pressure me through you. They said you're fighting over millions of dollars that could be ours if you'd just be reasonable. Rebecca's voice carried confusion and frustration. Dad, I don't understand what you're doing. We need this money. Why are you being stubborn? Because they're bullies with expensive lawyers, and I'm done letting people like them take whatever they want. Tom heard the echo of his grandfather in his own voice, the same stubborn pride that had kept the farm going through droughts and depressions. Your Uncle Raymond spent 40 years protecting this gold from them. I'm not going to hand it over just because they make threats. So what's your plan? Fight a legal battle you can't afford against a family with unlimited resources? The practical edge in Rebecca's tone reminded Tom painfully of Sarah. That's not pride, Dad. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's my choice to make. Silence stretched between them, heavy with all the words they weren't saying. Finally, Rebecca spoke quietly. Mom would want you to be smart about this. To think about the future instead of fighting old battles. Your mother would want me to stand up for something, instead of just surviving. Tom's throat tightened. She fought cancer with everything she had, even when the odds were impossible. She didn't give up because it was practical. She fought because that's what you do when something matters. This isn't cancer, Dad. It's money. And you're not fighting for survival, you're fighting for pride. After Rebecca hung up, Tom sat in the dusty silence of the vault, surrounded by gold that represented both fortune and trap. His daughter thought he was being irrational, and maybe she was right. The smart play was obvious: take whatever deal he could get, salvage something from the wreckage of his life, and move forward. But Tom kept thinking about his grandfather's land, now owned by Cornerstone Holdings. About farms across the county that had disappeared into corporate portfolios. About people like the Whitfields who thought money and connections gave them the right to take whatever they wanted from people who'd actually earned it through work and sacrifice. The gold in this vault wasn't just metal. It was his uncle's 40-year middle finger to people who thought they deserved things because of who they were rather than what they'd done. And Tom found himself unwilling to let that stand for nothing. Peterson arrived at 7 that evening, briefcase in hand and concern etched deep in his face. Mr. Bennett, I need to explain exactly how bad this situation could become. The Whitfields filed a formal claim this afternoon, alleging that your uncle obtained the gold through fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. They're seeking full ownership plus damages. Let me guess, they have unlimited resources for this fight. They have 3 law firms on retainer and connections at every level of state government. Peterson set his briefcase on the desk. I'm a small-town estate lawyer. I can't defend you in a case like this. Then help me find someone who can. Peterson pulled out a folder. I made some calls. There's a firm in Richmond that specializes in historical property disputes and Civil War era claims. They're expensive, but they take some cases on contingency if they think there's a strong argument. Tom opened the folder, scanning the information. Markham and Associates, founded by a professor who'd written extensively on Confederate property and post-war legal complications. The kind of expertise that could match the Whitfield family's resources, but with a price tag that made Tom's head spin. How expensive? Initial retainer is $50,000. If they take it on contingency, they'll want 40% of any settlement or judgment. Peterson met Tom's eyes. You don't have $50,000. And 40% of $10 million is still a fortune, but only if you win. If you lose, you get nothing and owe legal fees. What are my odds? Peterson hesitated, then spoke with the careful honesty of a lawyer who'd seen too many cases go wrong. The Whitfields have a credible claim that your uncle used information obtained while working for them. But you have equally credible arguments: the gold was hidden by your direct ancestor, it's been on Bennett family property for over a century, and Confederate payroll gold has complicated ownership status. A judge could go either way, which means years of litigation and enormous costs for both sides. Unless you negotiate a settlement. Not 50-50 necessarily, but something both parties can live with. 70-30 in your favor, maybe, given the strength of your position. You'd still walk away with millions, and the Whitfields would get enough to claim a victory. Tom looked around the vault, at the careful organization his uncle had maintained for decades. Raymond could have negotiated. Could have settled. But he'd chosen to fight, to keep the Whitfields from getting what they felt entitled to, and he'd died with that battle still raging. Set up a meeting with the Richmond lawyers, Tom said finally. I want to know if they think I can win outright, not just negotiate a better surrender. Over the next week, Tom lived in the warehouse, sleeping on an air mattress and eating takeout while he prepared for the fight ahead. The security system he'd installed caught 3 separate attempts by unknown parties to approach the building after dark, probably Whitfield operatives trying to assess his defenses or find a way to steal the gold before courts could freeze it. Rebecca called daily, each conversation a variation on the same argument. She thought he was being irrational. He thought he was being principled. Neither could convince the other, and the distance between them grew with each call until they stopped trying. The Richmond lawyers arrived on a Wednesday morning, 2 partners from Markham and Associates who spent 6 hours examining the gold, the documents, and Tom's legal position. Sarah Markham was 60 and sharp as broken glass, with a reputation for winning impossible cases through superior preparation and courtroom presence. Her partner, James Chen, was younger but equally formidable, a historian who'd written definitive works on Civil War property law. Your uncle built an impressive case, Sarah said finally, setting down the last journal. But he made one critical error: he never formally established legal ownership. He possessed the gold, but possession isn't ownership under property law, especially with contested historical artifacts. So the Whitfields can take it? Not exactly. James spread out copies of the documents Raymond had collected. Marcus Whitfield abandoned his military post and stole Confederate government property. That makes the original acquisition theft, which means no one has clean title to this gold, not the Whitfields through Marcus, not your family through Marcus's marriage to your great-great-grandmother. Tom felt his stomach sink. So we both lose? Not necessarily. Sarah's eyes gleamed with the light of someone who'd found an angle. Confederate government property that was never formally recovered or redistributed falls into a category called abandoned military assets. There's precedent for such property being awarded to the finder, especially if the finder can demonstrate direct ancestral connection to the original holder. Marcus Whitfield is my great-great-grandfather. Exactly. And your uncle spent 40 years researching and locating this gold, which the Whitfields never found despite their own efforts. Under finder's rights doctrine, combined with your blood connection to Marcus Whitfield, you have a strong argument for full ownership. Sarah leaned forward. But here's the key: we'd need to prove the Whitfields have no superior claim, which means exposing their ancestors' desertion and theft publicly. Are you prepared for that level of warfare? Tom thought about Eleanor Whitfield's sharp eyes, Marcus's barely concealed threats, the family united in their conviction that they deserved this fortune. They threatened my daughter. Tried to intimidate me into surrendering. Yes, I'm prepared. Then we'll take your case on contingency, 40% if we win, nothing if we lose. But I need you to understand what this means. The Whitfields will fight dirty. They'll dig into your life, your finances, your family history looking for anything they can use. They'll drag this through courts for years if necessary. Are you certain you want this fight? Tom looked around the vault one more time, thinking of his uncle spending decades in this same building, protecting something he believed belonged to the Bennett family through blood and sweat and stubborn refusal to surrender. My uncle didn't give up for 40 years. I can give it a few more. The legal battle that followed consumed the next 18 months of Tom's life. The Whitfields filed motion after motion, each one requiring responses that ate away at Tom's time and energy. Sarah and James fought back with equal ferocity, building a case that painted Marcus Whitfield not as a heroic ancestor but as a deserter and thief who'd betrayed his duty for personal gain. The media attention was everything Tom had feared and worse. Bankrupt farmer fights for Confederate gold made national headlines. Treasure hunters showed up in Whitfield asking questions. The warehouse was broken into twice despite the security system. Though nothing was taken, the gold had been moved to a secure facility early in the legal process. Rebecca stopped calling after the third month. Her silence hurt worse than the Whitfield family's attacks, but Tom understood. She'd wanted him to take the easy money and start over. Instead, he'd chosen a fight she couldn't comprehend, and she'd stepped back to protect herself from the fallout. The preliminary hearings went better than expected. Sarah Markham proved to be everything her reputation promised: brilliant, aggressive, and willing to expose truths that the Whitfield family had kept buried for generations. Documents proving Marcus Whitfield's desertion, testimony from Civil War historians about Confederate gold protocols, evidence that the Whitfields had known about the gold's approximate location for decades but never found it themselves. The Whitfields fought back hard, painting Raymond as a con artist who'd abused Eleanor's trust, Tom as a desperate man clinging to stolen property, the Bennett family as opportunists exploiting a tragedy. But their case weakened as Sarah methodically proved that no one could claim clean ownership of gold that had been stolen in the first place. 14 months into the litigation, Eleanor Whitfield died. The funeral was private, but Tom heard about it through Peterson, who attended out of professional obligation. Her death seemed to deflate the Whitfield family's resolve. Marcus called 2 weeks later with a settlement offer that shocked Tom with its simplicity. They met at a neutral lawyer's office in Richmond, Marcus looking a decade older than when Tom had first seen him. "My grandmother's last words were about that damn gold," Marcus said without preamble. "She'd spent 60 years chasing it, convinced it would prove our family's honor. Instead, it's destroyed our reputation and cost us millions in legal fees. So you're giving up?" "We're being realistic." Marcus slid a document across the table. "The court is likely to award you the gold under finder's rights, especially after your lawyers demolished our ancestral claim. So we're offering to withdraw our claim entirely in exchange for one thing: you donate 10% of the gold's value to a Civil War historical preservation fund in the Whitfield name. We get some dignity back, you get the gold, and this ends." Tom read the settlement terms carefully, Sarah Markham reviewing them beside him. It was better than he'd dared hope: full ownership of the gold, minimal concessions, and the legal battle over. "Why now?" Tom asked. "You could have kept fighting." "Because my grandmother was wrong." Marcus's voice was heavy with something that might have been grief or just exhaustion. "She taught us that bloodline and honor were everything, that we deserved the gold because of who our ancestor was. But your lawyers proved that our ancestor was a coward and a thief. Fighting to honor him means defending a lie, and I'm tired of it." Tom signed the settlement that afternoon. 2 weeks later, a judge approved it, and the gold officially became his property. After Sarah and James took their contingency fee and taxes were paid, Tom was left with approximately $6 million, a fortune that seemed both smaller and larger than he'd imagined during the long months of litigation. Rebecca called the day after the settlement was finalized. "Dad, I saw the news." "Congratulations." The word felt hollow after their months of silence. "Thanks, Becca. I'm sorry I wasn't there to support you. I was angry that you chose to fight instead of taking the easy money, and I couldn't understand why it mattered so much. Do you understand now?" "I think so. You weren't fighting for the money. You were fighting because walking away felt like giving up on everything Grandpa and Uncle Raymond stood for. Even if that meant years of struggle." Tom felt tension he'd carried for months finally release. "Your mother used to say that the easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing. I know I made your life harder by fighting this. You made your own life harder, Dad. But you won." Rebecca's voice softened. "What are you going to do now?" That was the question that had kept Tom awake nights even after the settlement. The money could buy back the farm from Cornerstone Holdings. Could restore everything he'd lost. But standing in the warehouse where his uncle had spent 40 years protecting a secret, Tom realized he didn't want to go back to what was. "I'm buying land," he told Rebecca. "Not in Mercer County, somewhere new. And I'm starting a foundation to help family farms fight corporations like Cornerstone. Legal defense funds, financial assistance, advocacy work. Your Uncle Raymond protected this gold for decades because he didn't trust our family to use it wisely. I'm going to prove he should have trusted us." 3 months later, Tom stood in a different field in a different county, soil dark and rich beneath his boots. The land he'd purchased was smaller than the Bennett homestead had been, just 80 acres, but it was his, free and clear, with no debt and no corporation breathing down his neck. Rebecca had agreed to help manage the foundation, using her agricultural science background to develop programs that addressed the real problems family farms faced. They'd already funded legal battles for 3 families fighting foreclosure, with more cases in the pipeline. The Bennett Family Agricultural Foundation was becoming known in farming communities across the state, not for handouts, but for support when people needed to fight back. Tom hired a crew to renovate the old house on the property, nothing fancy but solid and well-built. He planted cover crops on fields that had been neglected, beginning the slow work of building soil health that his grandfather had taught him decades ago. The work felt different now, not survival but choice, not desperation but purpose. The warehouse in Whitfield stayed in Tom's name, converted into a regional office for the foundation. The vault where his uncle had kept his secrets now held files and records of families they were helping, a different kind of treasure that grew with each case they won. On the first anniversary of the settlement, Tom visited his grandfather's grave in Mercer County. The Bennett family plot was old, headstones weathered by time and elements. His grandfather's stone was simple: James Bennett, 1922 to 1986. He fed his family and his community. No mention of the years of struggle, the debts, the endless cycle of work that had defined his life. Tom's father was buried beside him, and Sarah's grave was on the other side, her stone reading, Sarah Bennett, 1975 to 2020. She fought with grace. Tom had chosen those words 3 years ago, when the grief was still raw and the future seemed impossibly dark. He knelt between the graves, pulling weeds that had grown around the bases. "I don't know if you'd be proud of what I did," he said to the stones and the bones beneath. "Grandpa, you always said Bennett land was everything, and I walked away from it. But I couldn't keep fighting for soil that didn't want me anymore. And Sarah, you always said I was too stubborn for my own good. You were right." The wind moved through the old cemetery trees, carrying the smell of fields being prepared for spring planting. Somewhere beyond the fence line, a tractor worked methodically across corporate-owned land that used to bear the Bennett name. Tom didn't feel anger anymore when he saw it, just a quiet sadness for what was lost and a determination that it wouldn't all be for nothing. He pulled out his phone and called Rebecca. "Hey, I'm at the cemetery. Thought you might want to say something to Mom. Put me on speaker." Rebecca's voice came through clear and strong. "Hi, Mom. Dad's being sentimental again. He won his big fight, bought new land, started a foundation that's actually helping people. He's doing okay, better than okay actually. I think you'd be proud, even if he did almost give me a heart attack with the whole legal battle thing." Tom smiled, pressing the phone against his mother's headstone. "We're planting tomatoes next week at the new place, Sarah. Rebecca's coming out to help. She says I'm doing it wrong, but when has that ever stopped me?" After ending the call, Tom sat for a while longer, watching the sun move across the sky and cast shadows that shifted like memories. The gold that had started everything was gone now, converted to money and purpose. The farm his family had built was gone too, owned by people who saw it as numbers on a spreadsheet rather than generations of love and labor. But something remained. Something his uncle had protected and his grandfather had embodied and his wife had fought for. Not land or money or even legacy in any traditional sense. Just the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define worth, the determination to stand for something even when standing was costly. Tom had lost the Bennett homestead, but he'd found something his uncle had been trying to show him all along: that true inheritance wasn't about holding on to what was, but about building what could be. Raymond had protected the gold not for wealth but for the freedom it represented, the chance to break free from cycles of debt and desperation that had claimed every Bennett for 5 generations. And Tom had used that freedom not to escape farming but to transform what farming could mean. Not survival but choice. Not desperation but purpose. Not the hungry God his uncle had described, but a partnership built on respect and sustainability. As Tom drove back to his new farm in the evening light, he passed fields that belonged to other people, crops growing in soil that generations had worked. But he didn't feel the loss anymore, just a quiet gratitude that he'd been given a chance to start over, to build something that honored the past without being trapped by it. Rebecca was waiting when he pulled into the driveway, her car packed with boxes of files for the foundation's new cases. She hugged him tight, and Tom held his daughter close, thinking of all the generations of Bennetts who'd worked this soil and lost and persevered and tried again. "Dad," Rebecca said, pulling back, "there's a family in Georgia facing foreclosure. Small farm, third generation, corporation offering them pennies on the dollar. They called the foundation this morning asking for help. Then we helped them." Tom looked at his new fields, already showing signs of recovery under his careful management. "That's what we do now. We help people fight back." The sun set over land Tom had chosen rather than inherited, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded him of the treasure that had changed everything. But the real treasure, he understood now, wasn't in vaults or bank accounts. It was in having the freedom to choose what mattered, the strength to fight for it, and the wisdom to know that some legacies were worth building even when the old ones crumbled to dust. The Bennett name would continue, not on the land his grandfather had broken his back for, but in a foundation that helped others stand when corporations tried to force them down. And somewhere, Tom hoped his uncle was satisfied with how the gold had been used, not to feed the hungry god of land and debt, but to give people the choice Raymond had never had, the choice Tom had finally claimed, to build something new from the ruins of what was lost.